Earlier this week, President Cyril Ramaphosa suggested that companies should no longer require people applying for jobs to have previous work experience. In other words, he's saying that companies should be prepared to give jobs to people who haven't worked before. Many young people around the world have had this problem. You can't get work experience without a job, and you can't get a job without work experience. Kristal Duncan Williams is the project lead at Youth Capital, looking at youth unemployment. Kristal, good afternoon to you. I mean, this has been a problem for young people for generations. Is it still a big problem now?
Absolutely, Stephen. You know, the problem is we know that we have chronically high youth unemployment rates in South Africa. And actually 8 in 10 unemployed young people have never had a job. So the more unemployed young people are, the longer they remain locked out of the labor market, the more real this challenge is. It's one of the first things that young people will talk about when we run surveys with young people. It's one of the topics that always gets raised, you know, this need for work experience. And yet when we're speaking to employers, you know, the Youth Capital had a report come out just over a year ago where we spoke to 70 small business owners, particularly for small business owners. You can understand why they're hesitant to hire a young person if they've got to train and mentor that has absolutely no work experience, especially in a small business where there's not big HR departments to manage the training and onboarding of these young and inexperienced people. So it's really difficult to figure out what the answers are there. But things like learnerships and internships and public employment programs are a great way to kind of bridge that divide between young people who are, you know, desperate for their first work experience and employers who are saying we just can't take the risk of hiring a young person who's never worked before.
I mean, there's so many things to it. If you haven't worked, you may not know that you actually have to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning. For a young person, that can be quite a big adjustment. You won't know how to answer the company phone, how to respond to emails. And all of that can put a company's reputation at risk, especially nowadays.
Exactly. You know, I think it's great that the president's highlighting this work experience conundrum. But the reality for businesses is they're operating in South Africa where the economy is basically not growing at all. You've got load shedding in many areas of the country, water shedding and various other infrastructure issues. And you obviously are trying to make ends meet as a business. You can't afford what many people will term as a risk to hire a young person that could jeopardize your reputation. And this is really why Youth Capital has been funding public employment programs, especially things like the Basic Education Employment Initiative, where in a school you can get a range of experience. You know, as you said, young people can work in the office at a school, get the experience answering phones, answering emails. They learn what it's like to have to show up for work, to have to answer to specific KPIs, to be able to ask for leave and communicate with your manager when you have an issue. So these are all soft skills that are very difficult to teach anywhere else but on the job. And these kinds of programs really help to bridge that gap.
In other countries, I mean, in places like the US and the UK, they have internships. And even there, people who are supposedly working for free have actually been abused, you know, even in big banks, for example. So you've got to watch out for that too.
Oh, we have horror stories from the US. I mean, you hear about it all the time where there's lots of series made about it as well. You know, young people who are so desperate for a work experience that they kind of take anything they can get. As you say, the argument is, well, you're getting the work experience, so that's your payment. And that just can't fly in South Africa, where young people, actually all working people, have to spend a large portion of their salary on transport costs just to get to the place of work, never mind feed themselves lunch for the day. So it's just not a realistic expectation to say, oh, well, you know, I'm going to give a young person an internship and not pay them anything. That's not fair for the young person, and you know, it's not the way to bolster young people's ability to step into the labour market.
Have there been sectors in our society where this has worked well in the past? And I think particularly of electricians and plumbers, for example. And you would be, I mean, the phrase used to be you're an appy, you're an apprentice. So you would work, you would get paid. You would spend a lot of time carrying things around or sticking your arm up a pipe or something. But you would be learning, and then in the end, you would end up with your own business, and you'd take on your own apprentice. That's how it worked. I realize it sounds like a Star Wars movie, but that's how it worked. Is there not a way to sort of copy that with other professions?
Yeah, so I know that particularly in the IT sector and here in the Cape Town where I'm based, there are various organizations that are trying that approach, you know, a 6-month training program with young people, things like We Think Code, the Red Academy are the two that come to mind, where young people get experience in coding and other like web-based development work. And then, the other 6 months, they're based on a project. So the company is actually paying for that young person and their time. That young person's working on a real life project with the support, though, that they need, but at the same time getting, that real world experience and hands-on experience that make them, desirable hires. They have a really great success rate with getting young people employed after programs like that. I think the problem is we've kind of lost our way a little with the more technical and vocational training routes. We know that TVETs have a variety of functions from being great to terrible, and so that work-integrated learning piece is really something we have to work on, particularly in areas like, electronics, refrigeration areas, boiler making, all of these things on the scarce skills list where young people can make a lot of money. I think young people aren't even aware that these are routes they can take. And so I urge young people to investigate these.
You talked about sort of opportunities that government was running in education. And there's also the expanded public works program, and that's probably given millions of people around the country their first work experience. Is that still working to get people into employment, to get used to working?
So I think the problem with the Expanded Public Works Program and the Community Works Program is the monitoring and evaluation of these programs have been terrible. Again, you hear of very specific case studies. I always think of examples in KZN with the river, just kind of greening of communities, and then in the Western Cape with after-school programs where this funding has been used to give young people a first work experience that matters with training and mentorship. But then you have other horror stories of where people just rock up and they sign a piece of paper and they get money and they don't actually do anything. So I think the monitoring and evaluation of these programs has been sorely lacking, and that's another part of our call to say we need these programs. We need them to be funded long term so there's sustainability and momentum in the program, but that has to be paired with a robust monitoring and evaluation framework of how the money is spent, what skills young people are getting, and whether employers care that young people have this experience. Because, if the employers don't value public employment programs, then we're kind of doing all of this for nothing. So all of these things need to be in place.
We know, and you and I have had this conversation so many times, about how deep the crisis of youth unemployment is. And from time to time, I sort of have moments of hope. Unfortunately, Kristal, they're often quite brief, where I think, well, maybe government is doing this, maybe this will work. And I mean, look, every young person that is working, getting work experience, changes them, changes their lives, changes their families' lives as well, and unto the next generation. Do you get any kind of sense that government understands how to resolve some of these problems? Are we likely to see in 10 years that maybe we have made some progress? It is a big problem, obviously.
So you get little glimmers of hope, as you say, Stephen. I know I've spoken about the Basic Education Employment Initiative a lot, but that is for me a glimmer of hope in the Social Employment Fund. We've really seen government work with other, cross-department in the case of the DBE and the presidency, or in the case of the Social Employment Fund, work with local community partners instead of just coming in with a massive program and dumping it into a community, really looking at existing grassroots organizations and working with them. So I think these kinds of ways of working are really encouraging for me. On the flip side of that, towards the end of last year, we had the Department of Labor, announced that it was going to create something like 2 million work opportunities in 3 months while spending 18 billion rand. And so when I hear things like that, then, I do think that there's no hope, because if government still has the approach of we'll just throw money at this problem and then suddenly magically it will, resolve itself, then, that gives me pause for concern. So I think there's sometimes there are good programs, and I think what we need to do is say to government, instead of always pointing out the bad, to say these are good programs, these are ways we should be scaling them and improving them where we can.
Kristal, Duncan Williams, thank you. Project Lead at Youth Capital. Really do appreciate the time this afternoon.